Look at your legs right now. Not at the skin, at the muscle. Compare what you see to what you remember from 10 years ago. If your thighs look thinner, if your calves have lost their shape, this is not cosmetic. It is not a visual preference. It is a measurable biological process called sarcopenia, the progressive loss of skeletal muscle mass that begins in your 40s and doubles in speed after 60. I'm Dr. Laura Candy. Research published in the Journal of the American Medical Association found that after 60, the average adult loses up to 1% of total muscle mass per year, every single year, without intervention. But here is what the same research also found. The primary driver of this loss is not exercise deficit. It is a phenomenon called anabolic resistance, the muscle's progressive inability to respond to protein signals, and it is almost entirely correctable with the right foods at the right time. Today I am giving you the 5 foods that reverse it. I am Dr. Laura Candy, physician, public health researcher, and for 15 years of clinical practice I have sat across from adults over 60 who came to me describing exactly what you may be noticing right now. Not pain, not injury, just the slow, undeniable visual change that most physicians describe as normal aging and send you home with. 15 years of clinical practice showed me that anabolic resistance is not an irreversible biological destiny. It is a nutritional gap, and nutritional gaps have specific solutions. Harvard's research on mTOR signaling in aging muscle confirmed what the JAMA sarcopenia data pointed toward. The primary switch for muscle protein synthesis is a molecular pathway called mTOR. In a young adult, consuming adequate protein reliably activates mTOR, which triggers the machinery that builds and repairs muscle fibers. After 60, that switch requires a higher activation input to produce the same response. The muscle becomes less sensitive to the same protein signals. You can eat the same amount of protein you ate at 40 and still not reach the trigger threshold your muscle requires. The signal arrives. The switch does not flip. Your doctor told you to exercise more and eat protein. That advice is not wrong, it is incomplete. And the part that is missing is exactly what I am going to give you today. Think of it this way. The mTOR pathway is not a light switch. It is a dimmer switch with a rising threshold. When you were younger, a modest protein intake reliably turned the light on. After 60, the threshold has risen. The same input produces less light, less muscle protein synthesis per meal, less repair, less maintenance, and every day that goes by without crossing that threshold is a day the degradation exceeds the repair. And here is what makes anabolic resistance particularly frustrating from a clinical standpoint. It does not appear on a blood test. It does not produce a symptom your doctor will flag at a routine appointment. Clinical studies show that the only visible evidence of anabolic resistance is the gradual loss of muscle mass that most people attribute to aging, normalize, and stop discussing. The legs get thinner, the calves get flatter, and the assumption is that this is simply what happens. It is not simply what happens. It is what happens when the nutritional inputs the mTOR pathway requires are consistently below the threshold it needs. And once you understand what those inputs are, the solution is not complicated. Today that changes. And at the end of this video, I am going to name a food that most physicians over the past 30 years have actively told their senior patients to reduce or avoid entirely. A food that a Mayo Clinic meta-analysis of over 40 randomized controlled trials found is one of the most effective natural interventions for reversing sarcopenia in adults over 60. The clinical data does not support what most people have been told about this food, and most seniors watching this have already cut it from their diet based on advice that did not account for what their legs actually need. Stay until the end. If you are watching this and you are over 60, pay attention to what I am about to tell you. The first food is Greek yogurt, and I want to explain this with more specificity than most discussions of Greek yogurt ever reach, because the mechanism is what makes this food irreplaceable in the context of anabolic resistance. Greek yogurt contains 2 types of protein simultaneously, whey and casein. Whey is a fast-digesting fraction that produces a rapid, high blood leucine peak within 30 to 45 minutes of consumption. Casein is a slow-digesting fraction that sustains blood leucine levels for 4 to 6 hours after that initial peak. The combination is relevant to anabolic resistance for a specific reason. Clinical studies showed that the mTOR activation threshold in adults over 60 requires a leucine peak that exceeds approximately 2.5 grams per meal. Whey protein provides that peak fast enough and with enough concentration to cross the threshold. Casein then extends the post-threshold synthesis window far beyond what whey alone achieves. Think of it this way. The whey is the ignition key. It crosses the threshold and starts the engine. The casein is the fuel tank that keeps the engine running for hours after the ignition fires. Without the peak, the engine never starts. Without the sustained release, the engine stalls before the repair work is finished. Research from Maastricht University studying protein distribution and muscle synthesis efficiency in adults over 60 confirmed that dual-phase protein delivery at each meal produces significantly greater net muscle protein synthesis than equivalent protein in single-phase form. 150 to 200 grams of full-fat Greek yogurt provides both fractions in appropriate proportions for this purpose. Full fat. The fat matrix slows gastric emptying slightly, extending the absorption window further and improving the combined dual-phase effect, daily, not occasionally. The mTOR threshold needs to be crossed at every major meal for the cumulative effect to outpace the degradation rate. The second food is sardines, and this food is on this list because it delivers 3 distinct muscle synthesis inputs in a single tin, a combination no other practical food source matches. The first input is complete protein. Sardines contain all 9 essential amino acids in proportions closely matched to human muscle tissue requirements. The leucine content per gram of protein is high enough to meaningfully contribute to the mTOR threshold when combined with other protein sources at the same meal. The second input is omega-3 fatty acids. EPA and DHA from sardines reduce systemic inflammation, specifically the inflammatory cytokines IL-6 and TNF-alpha that directly suppress mTOR signaling. Clinical studies showed that reducing these inflammatory markers restores partial mTOR sensitivity in older adults, meaning the same leucine dose produces a stronger synthesis response in a lower inflammation environment. The anti-inflammatory effect of omega-3 does not just reduce discomfort. It literally unlocks more of the anabolic response from the protein you eat. The third input is vitamin D3. D3 is required for the function of the IGF-1 pathway, the growth hormone axis that regulates muscle fiber maintenance between meals. Without adequate D3, IGF-1 signaling is blunted. This was confirmed by research in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition demonstrating that D3 repletion in older adults with deficiency produced measurable increases in muscle mass over 12 weeks, independent of protein intake changes. Think of it this way. Greek yogurt fires the mTOR ignition. Sardines lower the threshold required to fire it, extend the anabolic window between meals, and activate the secondary growth signaling pathway simultaneously. They work on different parts of the same problem, 2 tins per week minimum, with a meal that contains fat. The D3 in sardines is fat-soluble and requires dietary fat for absorption. Now, those 2 foods address the leucine delivery and the inflammatory barrier to mTOR signaling. That covers the primary anabolic trigger, but here is where the picture becomes more complete, because there is a third mechanism in sarcopenia that neither of those 2 foods fully addresses, and it operates not during meals. It operates while you sleep. The overnight window is where the majority of muscle repair and maintenance occurs in adults over 60. During deep sleep, the body produces its largest natural pulse of growth hormone. That GH pulse drives muscle fiber repair and protein synthesis throughout the body, including the leg muscles that are the subject of this video. Without adequate GH release during deep sleep, the repair work that should happen overnight does not happen. And every morning you wake up having missed that window is a morning the degradation has outpaced the repair for another 12 hours. 2 specific minerals regulate this overnight GH pulse, and most adults over 60 are insufficient in both. The third food is pumpkin seeds. Zinc is the first mineral. Zinc is a required cofactor for testosterone synthesis. Testosterone, even at the modest levels appropriate to adults over 60, sensitizes muscle fibers to anabolic signals. When zinc is insufficient, testosterone synthesis is impaired, and reduced testosterone does not just affect libido. It reduces the muscle fiber's baseline sensitivity to every protein synthesis signal the mTOR pathway sends. Magnesium is the second mineral. Magnesium regulates the quality of deep sleep, specifically the proportion of time spent in the slow-wave sleep stage where GH is released at its highest concentration. When magnesium is insufficient, the slow-wave sleep stage is shortened and fragmented. Less time in deep sleep means a blunted GH pulse. A blunted GH pulse means reduced overnight repair. Think of it this way. The first two foods provide the daytime synthesis inputs. Pumpkin seeds provide the nighttime repair conditions. Without the overnight window functioning at capacity, the daytime work is only partially effective. 1 ounce of raw pumpkin seeds daily, consumed in the evening, not roasted. The roasting process reduces zinc and magnesium bioavailability by 15 to 20%. Raw, in the evening, so the mineral absorption aligns with the beginning of the sleep window. The fourth food is tart cherry juice, and the mechanism here targets the inflammatory environment that I mentioned briefly in the Sardines section, but from a different and complementary direction. Clinical studies showed that chronic low-grade inflammation, what researchers call inflammaging, is one of the primary barriers to mTOR sensitivity in adults over 60. The inflammatory cytokines that accumulate with age do not just cause discomfort. They directly inhibit the molecular machinery of muscle protein synthesis. They occupy binding sites that anabolic signals need. They trigger catabolic pathways that degrade muscle protein at an accelerated rate. Tart cherry juice, specifically Montmorency tart cherry, contains anthocyanins and other polyphenols that reduce CRP Illinois 6 and TNF-alpha. These are the specific cytokines most responsible for anabolic resistance through inflammatory suppression of mTOR. Research published in the Scandinavian Journal of Medicine and Science in Sports documented significant reductions in muscle damage markers and inflammatory cytokines in older adults consuming tart cherry juice after exercise sessions. The anti-inflammatory effect reduced the catabolic response to physical activity and improved the anabolic response to protein consumption. Think of it this way: tart cherry juice does not build muscle directly. It removes the inflammatory brake that slows the building process. When inflammation is high, every other intervention in this protocol produces less result. When inflammation is reduced, the same inputs produce more. 8 ounces of Montmorency tart cherry juice, unsweetened, daily. In the evening after the largest meal, to align the anti-inflammatory effect with the overnight repair window. Not sweetened, not blended with other juices. Pure Montmorency, unsweetened. If you are watching this and you are over 60 and your legs have been visibly changing for years, pay attention to what is coming next. Because everything I have described so far is the daytime anabolic trigger, the overnight repair conditions, and the inflammatory environment management. 3 layers of the same problem, each one necessary, each one insufficient on its own. The fifth food is the one I told you about at the beginning. The one most physicians over 60 years have told their senior patients to reduce or cut out, and I want to be specific about why the recommendation to reduce it was based on data that did not account for what happens to aging muscle when it is removed from the diet. 15 years of clinical practice showed me the pattern clearly. Patients who had followed low red meat dietary advice for years consistently presented with greater sarcopenia severity than comparable patients who had not universally, but consistently enough that the question of mechanism became unavoidable. Before the final reveal, check that you are subscribed. Every video this week covers a different leg warning signal. Tomorrow's video covers a symptom that most people have been told is simply normal. Do not miss it. The fifth food is red meat, specifically lean beef. And I want to be precise about the mechanism because the issue is not protein. Most people understand that red meat is a protein source. The mechanism that makes red meat specifically effective for reversing sarcopenia in older adults is a compound called creatine. Creatine is a molecule found almost exclusively in animal muscle tissue. The highest concentrations in the diet come from beef, pork, and fish. When you consume dietary creatine, it is absorbed and stored in your own skeletal muscle as phosphocreatine. Phosphocreatine is the immediate energy reserve your muscles draw on during the first few seconds of any physical effort. Standing, walking, climbing stairs, in adults over 60, phosphocreatine stores in leg muscles decline progressively as total muscle mass decreases. Lower phosphocreatine stores mean less capacity for brief physical effort. Less capacity for brief physical effort means less anabolic stimulus from ordinary daily movement. Less anabolic stimulus from movement means more rapid sarcopenia progression. The creatine depletion and the muscle loss accelerate each other. Mayo Clinic's meta-analysis of over 40 randomized controlled trials examining creatine supplementation in older adults found that creatine, particularly when combined with any form of resistance activity including walking, produced statistically significant increases in muscle mass and functional strength. The effect was documented specifically in the lower extremities. This was not a study of young athletes. This was a systematic review of older adults whose baseline profiles match the demographic watching this video. And here is what 15 years of clinical practice showed me about the red meat conversation. The recommendation to reduce it was based on cardiovascular data that conflated all red meat consumption with processed meat consumption and did not separate lean beef from processed products. Lean beef consumed twice per week does not produce the cardiovascular signal the original recommendations were designed to address. What it does produce is the creatine loading that supports phosphocreatine stores in aging leg muscle. And before the complete protocol, the sequence and combination of these 5 foods matters because each one addresses a different mechanism in the same process. Greek yogurt fires the anabolic trigger. Sardines lower the threshold and activate the secondary pathway. Pumpkin seeds enable the overnight repair window. Tart cherry juice removes the inflammatory brake. Lean beef provides the creatine substrate that makes physical activity anabolically productive. Removing any one of them leaves a specific gap that the others cannot close. And the most important part is this. Here is the complete protocol, consistent with Mayo Clinic's Sarcopenia nutrition guidelines for adults over 60, with breakfast every day, 150 to 200 grams of full-fat Greek yogurt. This is the first mTOR activation event of the day. Not a snack, a dedicated protein delivery event 2 times per week. 1 tin of sardines with a meal containing dietary fat. This provides D3, complete protein, and the omega-3 anti-inflammatory effect. Every evening, 1 ounce of raw pumpkin seeds, not as a snack skipped or forgotten, as a deliberate daily addition timed to the evening to align with the sleep window. Every evening after the largest meal, 8 ounces of unsweetened Montmorency Tart cherry juice. This reduces overnight inflammation and improves the deep sleep window where repair occurs. 2 times per week, 150 grams of lean beef, with the largest meal of those days. The fat in the meal increases creatine absorption. The anabolic stimulus from physical activity on those days is amplified by the creatine loading. The protocol requires 8 to 12 weeks before visible leg muscle changes are expected. Anabolic resistance reversal is a gradual process. The inflammatory environment changes in weeks 2 to 4. The mTOR sensitivity improvements develop over 6 to 8 weeks. The creatine loading effect is measurable in muscle energy capacity at 4 weeks. The red line is alcohol. Clinical studies showed that alcohol directly suppresses mTOR signaling and blunts the overnight GH pulse that pumpkin seeds are supporting. A single evening of alcohol consumption reduces muscle protein synthesis by up to 30% in the subsequent 24 hours. The protocol and regular alcohol consumption are not compatible. If this is the first time anyone has explained that the visual thinning of your legs is a nutritional mechanism with specific, addressable inputs, subscribe. I publish research-backed breakdowns like this every day this week. Drop your age in the comments. I read every single one. Tomorrow's video covers the pain that most adults over 60 feel in the morning and have been told is arthritis. Most of them do not have arthritis. What they have is a different problem entirely, and it happens overnight while they sleep. The nutritional solution works during the same window. Tomorrow, do not miss it.